I'm a guy, and when my wife's away visiting her parents, I just want to let loose a bit. When she's around, it's all nagging, and there's no place for a man in his own home. Plus, having a woman around takes care of all my needs.
My parents and I were speechless at his words.
See? Even you can't argue with that, Austin. So, Emily, just let it go. Don't bother me about what I do when you're not here.
David seemed to think my dad's silence meant he agreed, but even as a man, my dad was appalled by his words. It's incredibly disheartening that these words are coming from a man who has just become a father. After that, my dad called John and Sarah over, and a family meeting began.
There's no point in arguing here. So, just come back home tomorrow as planned, okay?
Even now, David didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation, and he naively said this to me. "All right, I'll come back tomorrow." I finally spoke up. During this family meeting, I reconfirmed David's true character and made up my mind to carry out a certain plan. My name is Emily Johnson. I'm a newlywed, having just gotten married a year ago, and I'll be turning 30 this year. My husband, David Johnson, and I have known each other since elementary school, so we've been close for a long time. Our families lived nearby, and our parents were acquainted with each other. On top of that, David is an only child, and his family is pretty well off. I've always known that David was a bit of a spoiled kid. We started dating in the spring right after we graduated from high school. We had a farewell party for classmates who were moving away for college or work, and that's when he confessed his feelings to me. We went to different universities, but since we were in the same state, we started dating. However, we actually broke up after a year. I started to feel unsure about continuing our relationship and whether marrying David was the right choice, so I ended things with him. David resisted, but I just couldn't see my future with him. However, a few years ago, we ran into each other by chance, and he asked if we could get back together. Honestly, I was hesitant, worried that we might end up breaking up again.
I really regretted breaking up with you, Emily.
That one sentence from David made me decide to give our relationship another try. After that, despite both of us being busy with work, we kept dating, growing our love, and 2 years later, we had a small wedding with just our friends and parents, becoming husband and wife. Now, we live together in an apartment near both of our parents' homes. We're really happy, but both of us are super busy with work. David and I both work full-time, leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night. Because of that, I wanted to completely share the household chores, but David wasn't on board with that.
Sure, we both work, but I make more money and my family's wealthier, right? If we made the same, I'd split the chores. But if I did housework too, it wouldn't be fair, right?
When I brought up splitting the chores, David would just laugh and say that. I believe that as a married couple, we should both be making an effort to support each other's lives, and our parents' financial situation shouldn't matter now. But David, who was raised as an only child and cherished by his parents, often boasted about his family's wealth and treated me like a servant. So, every day, I wake up early to do the laundry, clean, and prepare breakfast. Then, after work, I go shopping, and when I get home, I make dinner and clean up. Meanwhile, David leisurely wakes up, gets himself ready, and heads to work. When he gets home, he sits on the couch, plays on his phone, or has a drink alone early in the evening. Even if our salaries and family backgrounds are different, is this really what David means by fairness? I spent my days silently frustrated, just getting through the household chores. One day, David's mom, Sarah, called and asked me to come over to their house. She had received some farm vegetables from her friend and wanted me to pick them up. I was grateful for the vegetables and Sarah's thoughtfulness. However, if I stopped by Sarah's house after work, it would mean getting my household tasks done even later. Fortunately, it was Friday, so I didn't have work the next day, but I was exhausted and just wanted to unwind as soon as possible. However, I couldn't disregard Sarah's kindness, so I visited her house with a bit of reluctance.
I've been waiting for you.
When I arrived, Sarah handed me the vegetables she had prepared. She then started talking happily about the son of the friend who gave her the vegetables and how the neighbors had gone on a trip. It was all trivial stuff, but I couldn't find a polite way to cut the conversation short, so I stood at the entrance, forcing a smile and nodding along.
Oh my, it's gotten late. The vegetables are a bit heavy, so I doubled up the paper bags. They probably won't tear, but be careful, okay?
Thank you, I will.
You seem a bit down, don't you? You don't look well. Did I call you over when you weren't feeling good?
Sarah noticed my weary expression and asked with a slight tone of concern. No, I'm just a little tired.
Is that so? You should rest as soon as you get home. Will David be coming home early tonight?
I must have been at my breaking point because I couldn't manage a proper response. When I got home, I'd still have to cook dinner and do the laundry. On top of that, when David gets home, he'll just relax on his own. There's no way I can avoid feeling frustrated, and there's definitely no time for me to rest. I knew Sarah wasn't at fault, but I almost said something bitter.
Has David done something to upset you? If there's anything you want to talk about, don't keep it to yourself. I'm here to listen.
Sarah gently said this to me as she set down the vegetables she had been holding at the entrance. She then encouraged me to come inside, seated me on the couch, and listened to what I had to say. So that's the situation. Am I wrong for asking David to help out with some of the housework? As I spoke to Sarah, tears started to fall. Since we live nearby, Sarah and I keep in touch regularly. She's easy to talk to and has always been so kind, but I never intended to bring up issues with David like this. However, Sarah listened intently and then softly said,
I see. I'm sorry for putting everything on you, Emily. It's my fault for spoiling David so much.
No, it's not your fault, Sarah. But I just couldn't handle it on my own anymore.
Thank you for telling me. I'll talk to David. For now, why don't you stay over here tonight, Emily?
Once I calmed down a bit, Sarah placed a warm meal in front of me.
I'm just going to run out and buy some underwear nearby. Go ahead and eat while you wait.
With that, Sarah rushed out of the house with surprising speed. I wonder what will happen to David if I don't go home. There won't be any dinner, and the place will be a mess. I briefly thought about that, but I was overwhelmed by Sarah's energy and quietly reached for the fork. The food, cooked by someone else for the first time in a while, tasted so delicious. Why did I try to do everything on my own? I should have asked for help sooner. I was grateful to Sarah and spent a restful night at her houses. After this incident, I started consulting Sarah about everything. It seems Sarah even gave David a good scolding about sharing the housework.
Emily is not your mom, David. You can't rely on her for everything.
Geez, she just has to tattle about everything.
Though David muttered complaints, he has recently started doing at least the dishes. My workload is still much heavier, but even this small change is a huge relief. A while later, on my way home from work, I got a call from my friend Jessica. Jessica has been my best friend since elementary school, and of course, she's also friends with David. Since she also lives in the area, we often meet up or keep in touch, so I didn't think much of it when I answered the phone that day. Hello.
Emily, are you alone right now? Yeah.
I stopped in my tracks at Jessica's words. There was something unusual in her tone that made me feel uneasy. What's going on? You sound so serious.
Well, I don't know if you're already aware, and I don't want to meddle, but I heard a rumor that David's gotten into gambling. Apparently, he's been going to casinos.
What? I couldn't help but ask again. I couldn't believe that David would be gambling. You see, the real reason we broke up the first time was because of gambling. When David was in college, he got hooked on casinos and spent all his earnings there.
I lost at the casino and I'm broke. Could you cover dinner today?
Even when we had plans for a date, I often ended up paying for our meals. We started going out less, and when we did meet, I'd just sit bored next to him as he watched casino videos at home. I knew that if he kept gambling or started betting larger amounts, no matter how wealthy his family was, there was no way we could get married. That's why I broke up with him.
I swear I'll never gamble again. Please reconsider.
David pleaded with me when I tried to end things, but I couldn't fully trust him, so we broke up. When we decided to get back together, it seemed like David had completely quit gambling. He happily told me he was saving money now, and our mutual friends assured me that David really wasn't gambling anymore. I felt relieved, believing that he had truly changed because of what I said. But now, hearing that he might have started gambling again, it must be some kind of mistake. When I got home, I immediately confronted David. I heard you're gambling again. Are you? David's face briefly showed a look of panic, but he quickly composed himself.
It's nothing really. It's all within my allowance. I'm not betting everything like I did back in the day.
Even so, you promised you wouldn't gamble anymore. My anger caught him off guard, and his calm demeanor faltered. But then he snapped back, raising his voice.
Stop nagging. Fine, I'll quit, all right?
What kind of response is that? You're not even sorry.
I said I'd quit, so just leave it. You're such a pain.
I was really ticked off, but I held back my anger. I was hurt that he broke his promise, but the truth is, I was pregnant at the time. David said he'd quit gambling, and unlike when we were just dating, getting a divorce wasn't something I could easily do. If you do it again, we're getting a divorce.
Yeah, if that happens, we'll get divorced, whatever.
I sighed at David's lack of understanding of my feelings. He wasn't like this before. How did things change so much?
Oh, and don't tell Mom about this. That's the end of it, got it?
Unfazed, David threw these words at me as I sat there, exhausted by his attitude. A few days later, I told David about my pregnancy. Despite the unresolved tension from a recent argument, I couldn't keep the news to myself. When David heard, his eyes widened in surprise, and he was overjoyed. I hadn't expected him to be so happy, and I couldn't help but smile a little too.
I figured out why you were so angry the other day. It must have been your hormones out of whack.
His words made my face tense up again. I was angry because you broke your promise, not because of my hormones, remember?
All right, don't dig up the past. Stress isn't good for your baby.
David said with a big smile on his face. I couldn't exactly agree with him, but he was right that staying angry wouldn't do any good. David quickly shared the news with his parents, Sarah and John. They were overjoyed as well.
Make sure you're not leaving all the housework to Emily.
Sarah warned David, and perhaps because of that, he became more proactive around the house. It also seemed like he had stayed away from gambling since then. Before I knew it, my due date was approaching. However, even after the due date passed, there was no sign of the baby coming.
Still no baby?
David started getting anxious too. Seeing David like that helped restore my trust in him enough that I could smile, and together we eagerly awaited the birth of our child. I planned to stay at my parents' house after the birth. I had everything prepared for about a month-long stay. All that was left was to wait for the baby to be born safely. 4 days past the due date, my water broke, and I was rushed to the hospital. That very day, a healthy baby boy was born, filling our family with smiles.
Take it easy at your parents' place. I'll visit often.
David said with a smile as he drove me to my parents' houses on the day I was discharged. Thanks. Don't forget to clean the house while I'm gone.
Yeah, I got it.
I watched him drive away with a smile, and from that day on, I started my stay at my parents' home. We named our baby boy Scott. Taking care of a newborn for the first time had me completely overwhelmed. However, thanks to my mom's support, I was able to focus entirely on Scott's care, and he grew quickly, eating and sleeping well. David would stop by my parents' house after work or on his days off, spend a little time gazing at Scott, and then head home. Are you keeping the house clean? You're doing the laundry too, right?
Yeah, I am. Don't be so naggy.
David would give a light reply to my questions, all while happily gazing at Scott. Seeing him like this, I fully trusted him. Before I knew it, a month had passed, and in 2 days, it was time to return home.
You can stay longer if you want.
David offered, but I couldn't keep relying on my parents forever. I'll go back as planned the day after tomorrow. I'll take it easy until then, I told him as I started getting ready to go home. However, in the middle of my preparations, I suddenly became concerned about the state of our home. David said everything was clean, but I couldn't help feeling a bit uneasy. If he hadn't kept things tidy, it would be impossible to clean while taking care of Scott. Mom, I'm worried about the houses. Could you watch Scott for a bit while I go and clean up?
Of course, sweetie. I know David's at work, but why don't you stop for a cup of tea on the way back? Things will only get busier from here, so you need to take a break too.
My mom said that to me as she sent me off. Taking her up on her offer, I left Scott in her care and headed home. Even though it had only been a month, it felt like such a long time. When I arrived at the apartment, I turned the key with a mix of anxiety and anticipation about the state of the house. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside. Hi. But just as I called out, I heard a noise inside the house. Could it be a burglar? I braced myself. Suddenly, David came rushing out of the bedroom in a panic.
Emily, what are you doing here? You weren't supposed to come back until the day after tomorrow.
His hair was disheveled, and he was dressed casually. I couldn't help but widen my eyes in surprise. What about work? David stiffened slightly at my raised voice and began to speak.
Well, I figured I wouldn't be able to sleep with Scott around, so I thought I'd get some rest now. I took a vacation day.
But the way he stammered and kept glancing toward the bedroom made me feel uneasy. Is there something in the bedroom?
What? No, I mean...
Wait a minute. Someone's in there, right? As I said this, I pointed to the floor. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but there was a pair of women's sandals lying there. I had a similar pair, but mine weren't this worn out.
There's no one here, I swear.
Move aside. I pushed David out of the way and stormed into the house.
Wait, the bedroom is a mess.
David frantically tried to stop me, but I shoved him aside and opened the bedroom door. There, I found a woman in her underwear. Who are you? What are you doing in my house? I yelled as I stepped into the bedroom, crushing the woman's scattered clothes underfoot.
Well,
The woman's eyes darted to the clothes beneath my feet. David, in a panic, tried to pick them up, so I deliberately sat down on the clothes and pulled out my phone.
Hey, move! Those are Grace's clothes.
Grace? Oh, you mean the woman in her underwear?
No, it's not what it looks like. There's a reason for this.
David, flustered, tried to retrieve the clothes from under me, while Grace hid herself under the blanket. I recorded the scene with my phone.
What are you doing? Stop filming.
Stop? I'm just getting evidence.
no, please stop.
Grace finally spoke up, her voice weak and panicked. If you want me to stop, admit to your affair, apologize, and get out. I shouted at her. I might have seemed calm, but my heart was ice cold. Even now, when I try to recall the moment, I don't remember much of it. It's only by watching the video that I can piece together what happened. The recording ended with Grace sitting on the bed, admitting to the affair and apologizing. I don't even remember how I made it back to my parents' house afterward. The next day, when I finally woke up and fully grasped the situation, I tearfully told my parents about David's affair.
You've been pale and distant ever since you came back. I was wondering what happened.
My mom cried along with me, while my dad was furious.
Get David over here right now.
Following my dad's instructions, I called David, who showed up looking annoyed. When my parents confronted him, David smirked and started speaking.
Austin, you must understand, right?
What?
My dad's brow furrowed.
I'm a guy, and when my wife's away visiting her parents, I just want to let loose a bit. When she's around, it's all nagging, and there's no place for a man in his own home. Plus, having a woman around takes care of all my needs.
My parents and I were speechless at his words.
See? Even you can't argue with that, Austin. So, Emily, just let it go. Don't bother me about what I do when you're not here.
David seemed to think my dad's silence meant he agreed. But even as a man, my dad was appalled by his words. It was disgraceful to think that this was the same man who had just become a father. My dad immediately called Sarah and John over. I remained silent as our family meeting began.
You're all overreacting.
David grumbled, dissatisfied with our actions. But when John and Sarah heard what happened, they rushed over, looking panicked.
We can't let Emily and little Scott go back to David in this situation.
My parents said, standing firm while clearly angry. Sarah and John turned pale, repeatedly offering their apologies. They were likely just as shocked by David's behavior as we were. Amid all this, David spoke up.
There's no point in arguing here. So just come back home tomorrow as planned, okay?
Even now, David didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation, and he naively said this to me. All right, I'll come back tomorrow. I finally spoke up. During this family meeting, I reconfirmed David's true character and made up my mind to carry out a certain plan. However, David, completely oblivious to what I was really thinking, seemed satisfied with my response. Neither my parents nor Sarah and John said anything, leaving the room in silence. The next morning, I returned home early. Grace had left in such a hurry that she left her toothbrush and underwear behind. It was as if she had been living there. No wonder. Thanks to Grace, the house wasn't as messy as I had feared. David must have encouraged me to take my time at my parents' place to avoid disrupting his fun life with Grace. Living with Grace must have been fresh and exciting for him. The thought of them living together and cheating in our home made me sick. Yet David seemed pleased with my return.
I knew choosing you was the right decision. I wasn't wrong about you.
After all the complaints and hurtful words he's thrown at me, now he says this? I can't believe his nerve. And as far as I'm concerned, choosing David was nothing but a mistake. I held back the urge to say that, spent the entire day preparing, and the next day, while David was at work, I put my plan into action. I left the divorce papers behind and returned to my parents' house. When Jessica heard what had happened, she, along with her husband Kevin and some friends, helped me move out.
This is absolutely unbelievable.
If people think all guys are like this, it's just the worst.
Kevin was also appalled and furious at David's behavior. I took everything I had bought with my own money, such as the washing machine, vacuum cleaner, and refrigerator. I left the bed behind since, to me, it was now just trash. Thanks to everyone's help, everything was quickly moved into my parents' house. I had already informed my parents that I would be moving back. After we finished moving and had dinner, I got a call from David. When he came home and saw the divorce papers and an empty house, save for the bed, he must have panicked. I ignored the first call, but then he kept calling over and over. When I continued to ignore the calls, the doorbell at my parents' house rang.
Emily, I know you're in there.
It was David's voice at the door.
Want me to send him away?
Just ignore him. He'll leave eventually. My dad offered to help, but I coldly told him not to bother. Soon after, it started raining.
Emily, open the door. The rain's getting bad.
David refused to leave and kept shouting from the doorstep. He was clearly determined to take me back home no matter what. Reluctantly, I headed to the front door. Did you bring the divorce papers? I asked through the door.
I'm not getting a divorce. I'll stay here until you come home.
I sighed at his words.
Just come on. Let's go home together. The rain's getting worse.
Why would I care about the rain? I'm inside. David seemed miserable in the rain. His situation made me laugh, and I returned to the living room. The doorbell kept ringing, but I was determined to ignore it completely. As the rain grew heavier, I thought that maybe it would help him cool down, and I chuckled. However, after a while, David still hadn't left, so my dad had no choice but to contact Sarah and John. Sarah and John received the call and, just like the other day, rushed over with worried expressions.
What are you doing here?
We finally opened the door when we heard David's voice at the entrance, signaling Sarah and John's arrival. When David saw me, he exaggerated his relief and said,
Emily, you scared me disappearing like that. You told me you'd come back yesterday, didn't you? Come on, let's go home.
I couldn't help but laugh at his words. Go back to that house? Don't be ridiculous. Yesterday, I came back because you told me to, just to take care of the moving preparations.
So, you didn't forgive me after all?
David was genuinely shocked by my words. David seemed to think that everything was resolved just because I said I would come back. The truth is, David didn't think his actions were wrong in the first place. He kept trying to justify his affair as if it were no big deal. To him, my anger was probably just a temporary emotion.
Of course not. Do you think she could forgive something like that so easily?
Sarah was the first to scold David.
What?
Do you have any idea how people feel?
John raised his voice, berating David as well. Sarah was in tears, while John was furious. The scene was truly a complete disaster. At first, David resisted, but when he finally realized no one was on his side, he lashed out in frustration.
What's the big deal? Am I really that bad? Sure, maybe I hurt Emily a little, but I didn't bother anyone else.
You didn't bother anyone? Do you even know what people in the neighborhood are saying about you?
What?
David faltered at John's words. In fact, David's bad behavior had become the talk of the neighborhood. Just like Jessica had witnessed, many of our former classmates had seen David going in and out of gambling establishments. But that wasn't the worst of it. To make matters worse, David was known for being rude inside the establishments, threatening the staff, hitting on women, and even taking out his frustration on the machines. I learned about this from my friends during the move, and I was completely appalled. Apparently, Sarah and John had also heard about this from someone.
We tried to raise you with love and care, but I guess blood will tell.
John.
John's words, spoken in anger, made everyone feel uneasy. It seemed that David felt the same way too.
Blood will tell? What do you mean by that?
You're not our biological son. You're my sister's child.
What?
This was news to me as well. However, it seemed my parents were aware, as they exchanged glances and fell silent. Did you know about this, Mom and Dad?
Well, it's a small town. We had heard rumors.
This isn't the place for this conversation. Let's talk inside.
So we began another family meeting. David, soaking wet, stayed silent, his face pale. Then Sarah and John started to explain. John had a sister named Mary, who was 10 years younger than him. I had never met her, and David's grandparents never mentioned her either. Apparently, Mary had been disowned, and no one knew where she was or what she was doing now. When Mary was in high school, she became pregnant with David. The father was a member of what we would now call a criminal group. He was a man who made money by threatening people and committing fraud, with more arrests than could be counted on one hand. As soon as he found out Mary was pregnant, he abandoned her and was later imprisoned for his crimes. He's still serving time now. By the time Mary knew she was pregnant, it was too late for an abortion, so she gave birth to David.
I don't want to raise a child from a man like that. Who knows what he'll turn out to be? I'm not raising him,
she said, and then she left, abandoning the newborn David.
At the time, we were already married but struggling to have children, so we decided to take in David.
I always thought David's problems were because I spoiled him, but now I just can't defend him anymore.
The shocking truth left us all speechless. David turned pale and couldn't utter a word. My parents remained silent as well. It was no wonder that rumors had spread about a delinquent man like that being David's father. Most likely, not just my parents, but many people in town, especially the older generation, knew about it.
We raised you as our own flesh and blood, but we just can't handle this anymore. When Mary was disowned, I didn't understand our parents' decision, but now I do. You're no longer my son.
Wait,
David began to tremble at John's words.
You've looked down on people, treated them like servants, and hurt others.
Mom.
No matter how much love we gave you, we were always told, he's just like his father, and I'm sure you can't even imagine how that feels.
David was stunned by those words. Every time he caused trouble, Sarah and John must have endured people whispering that he was just like that man's child. They never showed it, and they raised David with love, which even I could see. David had taken advantage of that love, forgotten to appreciate his parents, and done whatever he pleased. It's no wonder they were done with him.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
You're apologizing to the wrong person.
Sarah scolded David as he turned pale and began to cry.
I'm really sorry for hurting you, Emily.
Only after being scolded by Sarah did David finally turn to me and apologize. Afterward, both Sarah and John continued to apologize.
As our final responsibility as his parents, we'll do everything we can to support you in getting a divorce.
Dad.
David, drenched in rain and tears, kept apologizing over and over. With the help of a lawyer, I filed for our divorce, demanded alimony and child support from David, and also sought compensation from Grace. Sarah and John covered all the legal fees. Grace paid the $20,000 I requested, but David was slow to make his payments. Seeing this, John and Sarah paid the alimony and child support using the money they had saved for David. I can't accept money from you, John and Sarah, I said to them, but they both insisted.
This is David's money. We saved the allowances and gifts he received.
We plan to use it to help him if something happened. But if we don't use it now, the money would be meaningless.
With those words, I decided to accept the money. At first, David was against using that money for alimony and child support. Then, how do you plan on paying me? Only after hearing that from me did he finally agree to the payments. It was unlikely that David would be able to continue making monthly child support payments. Although the amount wasn't exactly what I wanted, I decided it was better to receive a lump sum now rather than deal with delayed payments and frustration later. So I had him pay all the child support at once. After that, I began a new life with Scott and my parents at their home. But the story doesn't end there. 2 months later, David showed up at my door again.
Emily, let's start over. I realized I can't manage without you.
It was almost the same line he used when he begged me to take him back before, but I wasn't falling for it this time. What do you mean you can't manage? I asked firmly, and David hesitated for a moment.
Well, I don't know how to handle things like utility bills and stuff.
What? You can figure that out on your own. What you need isn't me, it's basic life skills. I actually knew that the rent and utility payments for the apartment hadn't been processed. I had stopped all the automatic withdrawals from my account. I couldn't imagine that David had taken care of the arrangements afterward. After all, he had always left everything to me, so now he had no idea what to do. All you have to do is switch the payments to your own account. It's not that hard.
Well, yeah, but I don't know how to do that.
That's not my problem. You need to start learning. David might have thought I would help him, but I had no obligation to do so. Whatever happens to him now is none of my concern. His parents have cut him off, and word has spread among his friends, who are all distancing themselves from him.
I can't believe I had to pay alimony just for sleeping with a guy like David.
It seems Grace said that to him and then broke up with him. While Grace also needs to reflect on her actions, it's satisfying to know that David doesn't have anyone left in his corner. Make sure you pay the rent before you get evicted, I said, ready to end the conversation.
Then, could you lend me some money?
David's next words were beyond belief. What?
I don't have any money left because I paid you.
That's not my problem. Besides, don't you have some savings? David hesitated before answering my question.
Well, the thing is, I lost it all gambling.
What? I was completely dumbfounded. At the same time, I couldn't help but laugh. You've lost everything because of your own actions. This is what they call reaping what you sow. Just make sure you don't get involved with any shady loan sharks. David had lost everything because of his behavior. He had always struggled to apologize or reflect on his actions, but this incident was probably a significant wake-up call for him. I hoped that this would finally make him learn something. In the end, David filed for bankruptcy. It seems he genuinely didn't know how to handle the paperwork, but in reality, he probably didn't have any money to pay in the first place. He was evicted from the apartment and became a laughingstock among his friends. His behavior toward me became the talk of the neighborhood, and it seems he felt the shame of it all. Afterward, David moved away, almost as if he were fleeing. I don't know where he is now or how he's living, but the fact remains that he is Scott's father. I hope that he can turn his life around and become a better person. Scott is growing up well. Although the words "blood will tell" that Sarah and John said to David still linger in my mind, I believe that David's problems stemmed more from his character than from anything else. He just couldn't accept the love they gave him. It wasn't about blood. It was about David himself. I still keep in touch with Sarah and John. Even though David's ties with them have been severed, Scott still sees them as his beloved grandparents. Of course, he feels the same way about my parents too. Scott will grow up receiving love from everyone around him. I want our whole family to be there to watch over him as he